My name is Dutton, and I'm 33 years old. For exactly 12 months, I had not heard a single word from my husband or his family. I had moved 1,800 miles away to Seattle and vanished. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone lit up with a Dallas area code. I did not answer. Over the next 6 hours, my mother-in-law, Susan, left 32 increasingly unhinged voicemails. She did not ask how I was doing. She demanded I board a flight back to Texas immediately because my sister-in-law, Chloe, had a childcare emergency and needed a free nanny for a month. Susan called me a selfish runaway wife who owed their family and demanded I make myself useful. I did not call her back. Instead, I walked into my home office, printed 400 pages of highly sensitive financial documents, and packed them into a heavy cardboard shipping box. When they opened that package, the entire family turned against each other and cut off all contact for good. Before I tell you exactly what was inside those pages and how I made them tear each other apart, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Maya Tells Stories. But only do it if you have ever been treated like unpaid help by your own in-laws. Drop your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. I want to know who is listening today. Now let me take you back to Dallas, Texas, so you can understand the lethal trap I mailed to them. To understand why I sent that package, you have to understand the role they forced me to play. I am not a nanny. I am not a personal assistant. I am a licensed forensic bookkeeper. But to my husband Connor and his suffocating family, my career was nothing more than a convenient, free resource for them to exploit. For 7 years, I was the invisible glue holding their fake wealthy aesthetic together. Susan paraded around the Dallas Country Club pretending she was a brilliant real estate investor, when in reality, I spent every single weekend untangling her horrific tax liabilities so she would not go to federal prison. Chloe ran a boutique that hemorrhaged cash every month, and I was expected to balance her books, file her corporate compliance, and watch her 3 toddlers whenever she had a networking brunch. Connor just smiled and happily let his family treat me like an indentured servant. They never paid me a single dime. They called it family duty. They expected me to shut up, smile, and do the math. But when you force a forensic auditor to manage your entire family finances for free, you hand them the keys to every skeleton in your closet. And my in-laws had an absolute graveyard. The breaking point happened exactly 14 months ago. It was a suffocatingly humid Thursday night in Dallas. The air conditioning in our suburban house was fighting a losing battle against the oppressive Texas heat. But the atmosphere inside my home office felt entirely, completely frozen. Susan had marched through my front door earlier that evening, smelling heavily of expensive Chardonnay and her signature floral perfume. She marched straight to my dining room table and dropped a massive, overflowing cardboard box filled with faded, crumpled receipts, bank notices, and unorganized vendor invoices. She did not ask how my day went. She simply tapped her manicured fingernail against the top of the box and demanded I prepare Chloe and her failing boutique for an imminent Internal Revenue Service compliance check. For those outside the financial sector, an IRS compliance check is not a casual administrative review. It is a ruthless federal inquiry designed to uncover deliberate tax evasion and corporate mismanagement. Chloe had spent the last 3 years treating her boutique business account like a personal automated teller machine. She swiped the corporate card for luxury handbags, expensive spa treatments, and lavish vacations under the guise of networking expenses. Susan knew the federal government was closing in, and she expected me to spend my entire weekend magically transforming her daughter from a negligent fraudster into a responsible small business owner. I brewed a strong pot of black coffee, sat down at my dual monitors, and began the exhausting process of reconstructing the boutique ledger from scratch. I spent 4 hours separating legitimate wholesale inventory purchases from Chloe and her absurd personal spending. But as I dug deeper into the general ledger, I hit a massive gaping hole in the balance sheet. Exactly $40,000 was simply gone. It did not disappear overnight in one massive transaction. It was siphoned out in staggered, methodical, digital transfers over the course of 8 months. The amounts were carefully selected to stay just under the threshold that might trigger an automatic fraud alert from the merchant processing company. As a forensic bookkeeper, I do not believe in missing money. Funds do not simply vanish into thin air. They leave digital footprints. I isolated the outgoing transfers and extracted the destination routing number. It did not belong to an international supplier or a local Dallas vendor. It was a domestic routing number tied to a private wealth management credit card at a completely different banking institution. I opened a specialized clearinghouse database I use for my corporate clients and ran a trace on the account holder. The name that populated on my glowing screen made the breath completely leave my lungs. The account belonged to my husband, Connor. Connor made a decent mid-level salary in technology sales, but he constantly complained about the cost of household groceries or utility bills. He claimed his commissions were slow to justify why I had to pay the majority of our shared mortgage. Yet here was undeniable proof that he was quietly embezzling a staggering $40,000 from his own sister and her failing retail store. I needed to see exactly where that stolen money was going. Connor was arrogant, but he was not exceptionally careful with his digital security. He frequently left his browser autofill passwords active on our shared home network router. I bypassed his standard login screen and gained full access to the private credit card portal he had hidden from me for years. The monthly statements loaded onto my screen, line by line. Connor was not secretly investing in the stock market or buying high-end tech equipment. I saw recurring monthly charges of $4,000 for a high-rise luxury apartment complex located 3 hours south in Austin, Texas. I saw massive, expensive dinner bills at trendy rooftop restaurants, boutique fitness class charges, and receipts for expensive athletic apparel. I tracked the residential lease payments to a specific unit number and ran a quick public records search on the county property database. The tenant registered to that luxury apartment was a 24-year-old Pilates instructor. My husband was using the money he stole from his sister to completely fund a lavish double life with a woman nearly 10 years younger than me. The betrayal was a brutal physical blow. My hands began to shake, and a cold, ringing sound echoed in my ears. I had spent 7 years loving this man, supporting his career and sacrificing my own free time to keep his family out of financial ruin. In return, he was siphoning capital to play the role of a wealthy benefactor for a young mistress. But the deepest cut, the true horror of that humid Dallas night, had not even revealed itself yet. I needed to know if Chloe was aware her brother was bleeding her business dry. I needed to know if the $40,000 deficit was a hostile theft or a coordinated arrangement. I accessed the boutique administrative email server, which I had full administrative rights to since I managed their web hosting. I opened the archive folder and ran a keyword search for Connor and the specific dollar amounts. What I found was a level of psychological cruelty and familial betrayal I could not have possibly imagined. It was a long archived email chain between Chloe Susan and Connor. They were entirely aware of the Austin apartment. They were fully aware of the Pilates instructor. In fact, they were actively strategizing how to hide the $40,000 deficit from me. Susan explicitly instructed Connor to route the stolen money through Chloe and her vendor portal because Susan knew I would eventually just balance the ledger and make the problem disappear. They treated my professional expertise like a free money laundering service. I sat in the dark, reading their casual, cruel exchanges. Chloe complained that Connor was taking too much cash, but Susan told her to quiet down and let her brother have some fun. They joked about my relentless efficiency. They laughed at how quickly I resolved their tax burdens, while Connor spent his weekends driving to Austin under the guise of overnight sales conferences. My own mother-in-law and sister-in-law were actively helping my husband hide his infidelity. They were using my unpaid labor, my late nights, and my severe exhaustion to keep their businesses afloat solely so Connor could afford his cheating lifestyle. They viewed me as a highly functional appliance. I was just a machine they plugged in to fix their messes.
They thought I was too docile to ever check the metadata on those emails. They assumed the quiet, obedient bookkeeper would just look at the missing $40,000, chalk it up to Chloe and her terrible math skills, and magically fix the IRS audit. They thought I would remain their loyal servant forever, blindly securing their wealth, while they mocked me behind my back. They were catastrophically wrong. When a normal person discovers their spouse is cheating and their in-laws are complicit, they usually confront them. They scream, they throw plates, they demand answers, and they cry. They give their enemies the opportunity to gaslight them, delete the evidence, and prepare a legal defense. But they did not marry a normal person. They married a forensic auditor. When an auditor uncovers a massive discrepancy, we do not cry. We do not scream. We quietly build an airtight, inescapable case. I stared at the email chain highlighting their collusion, and a profound, icy calmness washed over my entire body. I was not going to confront them. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire existence. I downloaded every single credit card statement, every forged routing signature, and every cruel email from that server. I copied the files onto an encrypted external hard drive and slipped it into my pocket. The weeping and the grief could wait. I had to execute a flawless, invisible exit strategy right under their arrogant noses and leave them holding the bag for the financial crimes they had committed. I did not scream. When a person discovers their entire reality is a fabricated lie funded by their own exhaustion, the natural human instinct is to demand immediate accountability. I did not throw Connor and his expensive golf polos onto the manicured front lawn. I did not drive to the Dallas Country Club and confront Susan over her overpriced Cobb salad. Screaming is a catastrophic tactical error. Confrontation gives your enemies the one thing they desperately need, which is time. It gives them time to prepare a defense, hide the remaining assets, and spin the narrative to make you look like the hysterical, unstable spouse. I refused to give them a single second of preparation. Instead, I spent the next 2 months executing a flawless, completely invisible exit strategy right in front of their arrogant faces. The first phase of my departure required neutralizing my legal exposure. For years, Susan and Chloe had used my immaculate credit score to secure commercial leases and lines of credit for their failing ventures. I was listed as the registered agent and primary financial guarantor on 3 different corporate entities. If I simply walked away, the federal government and their aggressive creditors would eventually come after my personal savings when those businesses inevitably collapsed. I had to sever the ties quietly. I spent my late nights drafting official resignation letters and corporate amendment forms. I did not send these documents to my in-laws. I submitted them directly to the Texas Comptroller and the Secretary of State. I systematically uncoupled my Social Security number from every single one of their toxic limited liability companies. I transferred the registered agent status directly to Susan and her home address, ensuring that all future audit notices, lawsuit summons, and tax penalties would be delivered straight to her pristine front porch. I built a massive firewall between their financial crimes and my personal identity. They had absolutely no idea they were suddenly operating without a safety net. The second phase was the most dangerous, but it was also the most crucial. I needed to protect my own wealth. Over our 7-year marriage, I had built a substantial private savings account through my independent consulting work. Because Texas is a community property state, Connor would technically be entitled to half of my hard-earned money in a standard divorce. I was not about to let my cheating husband walk away with my capital to fund his luxury apartment in Austin. I needed him to legally forfeit his rights to my assets before I ever filed the divorce petition. I utilized his own laziness as my ultimate weapon. Connor hated administrative tasks. He viewed paperwork as entirely beneath him, and he always trusted me to handle the boring details of our shared existence. I drafted a dense,
highly sophisticated postnuptial agreement. The document explicitly stated that in the event of a separation, Connor waived all rights to my personal bank accounts, my retirement funds, and my independent business revenue. Furthermore, it legally designated his private credit card debt, the same debt he used to fund his young mistress, as his sole individual responsibility. I printed the binding legal contract and buried it deep inside a thick stack of routine quarterly tax filings and insurance renewal forms. I waited for a Sunday afternoon when the Dallas Cowboys were playing a crucial division rival on television. Connor was slouched on our living room sofa, holding a cold beer, completely absorbed in the football game. I walked casually into the room holding a black ink pen and the stack of documents. I blocked his view of the television screen for just a second and told him I needed his signature on the standard federal tax extensions before the Monday deadline. Connor let out a loud, annoyed sigh. He did not ask to read the paragraphs. He did not question the legal headers. He just wanted me to move out of the way so he could watch his football game. He grabbed the pen and scribbled his signature across the bottom of the post-nuptial agreement without glancing at a single word. He handed the clipboard back to me, took another sip of his beer, and cheered at the television screen. He had just voluntarily surrendered hundreds of thousands of dollars and legally isolated himself with his own fraudulent debt, simply because he could not be bothered to read what his wife put in front of him. The third and final phase was my physical escape. I needed a window of absolute, uninterrupted time to pack my belongings and vanish. Susan provided the perfect opportunity. For 6 months, I had been doing the unpaid administrative labor for a lavish charity gala Susan was hosting to boost her social profile among the Dallas elite. I negotiated the catering contracts, arranged the floral deliveries, and finalized the guest seating charts. The entire family, including Connor and Chloe, were required to attend the event from early Friday morning until well past midnight. I had meticulously built my own diversion. When Friday morning arrived, I kissed my husband goodbye and told him I would meet them at the banquet hall later that afternoon. The second his leased sedan disappeared. A year without my free labor proved to be absolutely catastrophic for the Montgomery family. From the quiet sanctuary of my high-rise condominium in Seattle, I watched their fabricated empire slowly crumble. I did not need to hire a private investigator or rely on neighborhood gossip to see their downfall. As a licensed forensic accountant, I have unrestricted access to a vast network of sophisticated legal databases, municipal property registries, and federal tax portals. I spent my quiet Sunday mornings drinking black coffee and systematically monitoring public records, trailing their digital footprints across the state of Texas. It was a fascinating exercise in watching extreme arrogance collide with administrative reality. Let us begin with my former sister-in-law, Chloe. Chloe had built her entire personality around being a successful, independent female entrepreneur. She treated her trendy downtown retail boutique like a personal playground rather than a functional business. During my tenure as her unpaid bookkeeper, I meticulously filed her quarterly sales revenue, managed her payroll liabilities, and submitted her annual franchise tax reports to the Texas comptroller. When I vanished, nobody picked up the slack. Chloe simply assumed the paperwork magically filed itself. By the 7th month of my absence, the state of Texas officially revoked her corporate standing. In the American business sector, failing to file franchise taxes results in the immediate forfeiture of corporate privileges. This means Chloe lost her limited liability protection. Every single vendor she failed to pay, every commercial lease she defaulted on, and every outstanding invoice suddenly became her direct, personal, legal responsibility. Her business bank accounts were frozen by state regulators. She could not even purchase wholesale inventory to stock her empty shelves. While Chloe was actively destroying her retail store, my former mother-in-law, Susan, was experiencing her own spectacular financial decay. Susan derived her immense social superiority from her commercial real estate portfolio. She spent decades bragging at the local country club about her brilliant property investments. But managing real estate in Dallas requires rigorous attention to municipal deadlines, zoning ordinances, and strict county tax assessments. I used to track every single one of those crucial dates on a master spreadsheet, ensuring her properties remained perfectly compliant. Without me, Susan completely ignored the mail from the city planners. Consequently, her commercial strip malls were hit with massive local code violations for unpermitted renovations and neglected fire safety compliance. The Dallas County tax assessor placed aggressive public liens on her residential rental properties due to severe property tax delinquency.
Susan was rapidly losing control of the very assets that funded her luxurious lifestyle. Then there was Connor. My cheating, entitled ex-husband faced the most humiliating reality of all. When he signed that postnuptial agreement during his football game, he legally isolated himself with the massive credit card debt he used to fund his Austin Mistress. Without my substantial corporate salary paying the mortgage on our suburban home, Connor was suddenly forced to survive on his own mid-level technology sales commissions. Those commissions were entirely insufficient to support a young Pilates instructor and a luxury high-rise apartment. When the stolen money from his sister finally dried up, his young mistress inevitably abandoned him for a wealthier benefactor. Facing severe eviction notices and drowning in compound interest, Connor broke his apartment lease and retreated back to Dallas. A 34-year-old man who once drove a leased luxury sedan and paraded around as a successful executive was forced to pack his minimal belongings in garbage bags and move directly back into his childhood bedroom at his mother's estate. Despite their overwhelming financial failures, their fierce Texas pride remained absolute. The cognitive dissonance was truly staggering to witness. They fiercely maintained their flawless social media facades as if their lives were completely perfect. I would pull up their public profiles and marvel at the delusion. Chloe posted highly filtered photographs of herself drinking expensive imported champagne at catered brunches, writing long inspirational captions about the struggles of being a wealthy business owner. Susan uploaded pictures of her leased luxury cars parked in the circular driveway of her estate, hashtagging her posts about generational wealth. They absolutely refused to admit the quiet woman they treated as a basic workhorse was the only structural pillar keeping them entirely out of federal bankruptcy court. They chose to live in a beautifully curated digital fantasy rather than face the terrifying legal consequences waiting in their physical mailboxes. But pride does not satisfy commercial creditors, and arrogance certainly does not pay the Internal Revenue Service. You can filter a photograph, but you cannot filter a federal subpoena. By the 12th month of my absence, the artificial walls finally closed in on them completely. The delusion shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Chloe received a certified letter from the federal government notifying her of a comprehensive corporate audit. She panicked and attempted to hire an actual certified public accountant in Dallas. Because her books were a catastrophic nightmare of commingled funds and missing revenue, the accounting firm quoted her a massive $20,000 upfront retainer fee just to open her files. Chloe did not even have $2,000 to her name. Furthermore, because her boutique was generating zero income, she could no longer afford the exorbitant tuition at the upscale private daycare her toddlers attended. She was facing federal financial scrutiny, and she suddenly had 3 screaming children at home with absolutely no child care coverage. The family was completely cornered. Susan was drowning in property liens. Chloe was facing a ruthless federal audit. Connor was sleeping in his childhood twin bed while hiding from aggressive debt collectors. They were out of money, out of options, and completely out of time. They realized they desperately needed a miracle to survive the impending collapse. That is the exact moment the phone calls began. My newly registered Seattle phone number was supposed to be completely private, but Susan used her country club connections to run a background check and acquire my updated contact information. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone screen illuminated with her Dallas area code. I sat at my kitchen island staring at the glowing device as it rang over and over again. I did not answer a single call. Over the course of 6 hours, Susan left 32 frantic voicemails. I listened to every single recording. She did not call to offer a profound apology for her cruel behavior.
She did not call to express remorse for helping my husband hide his devastating infidelity. She did not express a single ounce of regret for exploiting my highly specialized professional skills for 7 consecutive years. She called because she was terrified, and she needed her unpaid servant to return to Texas and fix her shattered universe. Susan truly believed she could simply order me to clean up their disastrous mistakes one last time. Her final voicemail shifted from a plea for help into a direct, hostile ransom demand, setting the stage for the most explosive retaliation I could possibly deliver. I sat at the kitchen island of my Seattle condominium, listening to the relentless buzzing of my cellular phone. The rain was steadily washing down the large glass windows, creating a quiet, peaceful barrier between my new life and the absolute chaos attempting to reach me from across the country. Over the course of 6 hours, the glowing screen displayed the same Dallas area code over and over again. I did not pick up the device. I simply watched the notification counter climb until it finally stopped at 32 missed calls. All 32 voicemails were left by my former mother-in-law, Susan. I waited until the digital barrage completely ceased before I reached for the device. I pressed the playback button and listened to the final recording. Susan delivered her 30-second voicemail with a level of absolute delusional audacity that could only be described as a masterpiece of narcissistic manipulation. Her voice snapped through my phone speaker, crisp and sharp, dripping with that highly specific brand of Southern condescension she had spent decades perfecting at elite charity luncheons and exclusive country club dinners. Dutton. It is Susan. She began not even bothering to offer a basic greeting or ask about my well-being. Connor is willing to forgive your little tantrum, but you need to act like an adult right now. I paused the audio for a fraction of a second, just to process the staggering weight of that opening sentence. She referred to my permanent relocation across the country, my complete severing of all contact, and my legal filing for a divorce as a temporary emotional tantrum. More importantly, she claimed that Connor was graciously willing to forgive me. My ex-husband was currently sleeping in his childhood twin bed, completely broke because his young mistress had drained his stolen funds and abandoned him. Yet Susan framed the situation as if I was the errant child who needed to beg for his royal pardon. I tapped the screen and let the recording continue. Chloe is facing a minor tax misunderstanding, Susan stated, her tone shifting into a brisk, commanding register. She needs you to handle her corporate books this weekend. Plus, she is currently without a nanny and she desperately needs childcare coverage. We are family, Dutton. You owe us this. Book a commercial flight to Dallas tonight, or I will have my litigation lawyers sue you for abandoning your marital duties. The voicemail ended with a sharp click, leaving a heavy silence hanging in my kitchen. I pressed the playback icon and listened to the entire message a second time. A normal person receiving a voicemail filled with such profound disrespect and aggressive legal threats might feel a sudden surge of intense anger. They might feel an overwhelming urge to call the person back, scream into the receiver, and demand an apology. Alternatively, a person easily intimidated by wealthy families might feel a wave of sheer panic regarding the threat of an impending lawsuit. I felt absolutely no anger, and I certainly felt zero panic. I only felt a cold, crystalline focus settling deep into my chest. As a forensic professional, my entire career revolves around analyzing raw data to uncover the hidden truth. Susan thought she was projecting immense power and unyielding authority, but the data embedded in her voicemail revealed something entirely different. It revealed that the Montgomery family was completely and utterly desperate. Let us analyze her demands, starting with her daughter, Chloe. Susan casually referred to a federal corporate investigation as a minor tax misunderstanding. The Internal Revenue Service does not initiate field audits over minor administrative hiccups. They initiate hostile audits when a business owner systematically defrauds the government, which is exactly what Chloe had been doing for years by treating her boutique revenue like a personal automated teller machine. Furthermore, the audacity of demanding that I fly 1,800 miles to fix a catastrophic federal tax crime and simultaneously provide free babysitting for 3 screaming toddlers demonstrated the exact level of servitude they still expected from me. Chloe could no longer afford her expensive private childcare because her boutique was effectively bankrupt. They needed a highly skilled forensic accountant and a full-time nanny, and they expected to acquire both without paying a single dollar.
Then there was the ultimate threat regarding her expensive litigation lawyers. Susan promised to sue me for abandoning my marital duties. This specific threat was almost comical in its complete legal ignorance. The state of Texas is a no-fault divorce jurisdiction, and the antiquated concept of suing a spouse for alienation of affection or marital abandonment was abolished decades ago. Furthermore, Susan was completely oblivious to the fact that my divorce from Connor had already been finalized remotely months prior. Connor was clearly too lazy or too embarrassed to inform his mother that the marital dissolution was already signed, sealed, and recorded by the county judge. Susan was threatening me with a marriage that no longer legally existed. They still believed they held the ultimate power in our dynamic. They still genuinely thought I was the frightened, obedient girl who would cower and submit at the mere mention of aggressive attorneys and wealthy family influence. They needed a massive financial bailout to save their crumbling empire, and they were trying to extort that bailout from me through manufactured guilt and blatant intimidation. I set my cellular phone down on the smooth quartz countertop. I did not shed a single tear for the family I had lost. I did not draft a furious response text outlining their numerous hypocrisies. Engaging with a narcissist is a tactical error because it validates their delusion that they still have a right to your time and energy. I simply walked out of my kitchen and moved down the short hallway into my dedicated home office. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and pressed the power button on my dual-monitor workstation. I reached into the locked bottom drawer of my heavy steel filing cabinet and pulled out a small, encrypted solid-state hard drive. This was the exact drive I had quietly smuggled out of Dallas 14 months earlier when I executed my invisible exit strategy. This small black device contained the absolute, unvarnished truth about the Montgomery family. I plugged the encrypted drive into my computer tower and typed in my complex alphanumeric password. The screen immediately illuminated with dozens of meticulously organized digital folders. These folders held every downloaded credit card statement, every deleted corporate email, every forged banking signature, and every single hidden equity transfer I had systematically archived during my 7 years of unpaid servitude. Susan called me today because she firmly believed I was going to capitulate. She thought the threat of a lawsuit would break my resolve. She assumed I was going to log into their frozen accounts, balance their fraudulent ledgers, negotiate with the federal tax authorities, and save them from total ruin one last time. She expected me to rebuild the very foundation I had quietly allowed to rot. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the glowing blue folders on my monitor. The quiet, subservient bookkeeper they exploited for almost a decade was officially dead. I was not going to send them a financial bailout. I was going to use their own data against them. I was going to pack their lies, their affairs, and their corporate thefts into a physical object and ship it directly to their front door. I was going to send them a bomb. The 30-second voicemail left by my former mother-in-law was an absolute masterpiece of narcissistic manipulation. I sat at my kitchen island in Seattle, watching the rain slide down the large glass windows, while her voice snapped through my phone speaker. The audio was dripping with that specific brand of heavy Southern condescension she perfected over decades of country club luncheons and charity board meetings. Susan did not begin the message by asking how I was doing. She did not offer a single word of apology for the severe emotional abuse I endured or the horrific financial exploitation she orchestrated.
Instead, she launched directly into a delusional monologue, assuming she still controlled every aspect of my existence. Susan stated in a brisk, authoritative tone that my ex-husband Connor was graciously willing to forgive my little tantrum. She actually referred to my permanent relocation across the country and my legal filing for divorce as a temporary emotional tantrum. She demanded that I stop acting like an ungrateful child and return to Dallas immediately to fulfill my obligations to their family. Her tone implied that I had simply taken an unauthorized vacation, and it was time for me to clock back into my unpaid shift. She then casually mentioned that my former sister-in-law, Chloe, was facing a minor tax misunderstanding. Calling a full-scale federal corporate audit a minor tax misunderstanding is a level of cognitive dissonance that only a truly arrogant individual can achieve. The Internal Revenue Service does not initiate field audits over minor misunderstandings. They initiate them when a business owner systematically defrauds the government, which is exactly what Chloe had done for years. But Susan brushed past the federal investigation entirely to deliver her ultimate demand. She stated that Chloe urgently needed someone to handle her corporate books for the weekend, and more importantly, Chloe required immediate, free childcare because her boutique was failing and she could no longer afford her private nanny. Susan actually expected me to board a commercial flight, fly 1,800 miles back to the state of Texas, untangle a catastrophic federal tax audit, and babysit 3 screaming toddlers without receiving a single dollar in compensation. She justified this insane request by stating, "We were family, and I owed them my loyalty." When her attempts at guilt-tripping failed to sound convincing enough, she immediately pivoted to aggressive legal threats. Susan lowered her voice into a cold, menacing register and promised that if I did not book a flight to Dallas by that evening, she would have her expensive litigation attorneys sue me for abandoning my marital duties. I listened to the entire recorded message twice. A normal person receiving a voicemail filled with such profound audacity and aggressive legal threats might feel a surge of intense anger. They might feel the urge to call the person back and scream into the receiver. They might feel a wave of panic regarding the threat of a lawsuit. I felt absolutely no anger, and I certainly felt zero panic. I only felt a cold, crystalline focus settling deep into my chest. As a forensic professional, I knew exactly how absurd her legal threats actually were. The state of Texas abolished the concept of suing a spouse for alienation of affection or abandonment of marital duties decades ago. Furthermore, Susan was completely oblivious to the fact that my divorce from Connor had already been finalized remotely months prior, because her own son was too lazy to contest the paperwork. Her threats were entirely empty, but they revealed a crucial piece of information. They revealed that the Montgomery family was completely desperate. They still believed they held the ultimate power in our dynamic. They still thought I was the frightened, obedient girl who would cower and submit at the mere mention of aggressive lawyers. They needed a massive financial bailout, and they were trying to extort it from me through manufactured guilt and blatant intimidation. I set my cellular phone down on the smooth quartz countertop. I did not shed a single tear. I did not draft an angry response text. I simply walked out of my kitchen and down the short hallway into my dedicated home office. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and pressed the power button on my dual-monitor workstation. I reached into the locked bottom drawer of my heavy steel filing cabinet and pulled out the small, encrypted, solid-state hard drive I had quietly smuggled out of Dallas 14 months earlier. This small black device contained the absolute truth about the Montgomery family. It held every downloaded credit card statement, every deleted corporate email, every forged banking signature, and every single hidden equity transfer I had systematically archived during my 7 years of unpaid servitude. I plugged the encrypted drive into my computer tower and typed in my complex alphanumeric password. The screen illuminated with dozens of meticulously organized digital folders. Susan called me because she believed I was going to send them a bailout. She thought I was going to log into their accounts, balance their fraudulent ledgers, and save them from total ruin one last time. I was not going to send them a bailout. I was going to send them a bomb.
The package I prepared that afternoon was meticulously organized down to the smallest possible detail. I left my condominium and drove to a local commercial office supply store. I purchased a heavy-duty corrugated shipping box, a roll of reinforced packing tape, and 4 thick, bright red manila envelopes. I specifically chose the color red because in the accounting profession, red ink universally signifies a severe deficit, a catastrophic loss, or an undeniable critical error. It was the perfect psychological primer for the absolute devastation they were about to receive. I returned to my home office and loaded a fresh ream of premium heavy stock paper into my laser printer. I grabbed a thick black permanent marker and wrote a single name on the front of each red envelope. I labeled the first envelope Susan. I labeled the second envelope Chloe. I labeled the third envelope Connor. I paused for a brief moment before labeling the fourth and final envelope Richard. Richard was my former father-in-law. During my entire marriage, Richard played the role of the innocent, passive bystander. He was a retired corporate executive who spent his days playing 18 holes of golf and drinking expensive scotch at the clubhouse, while his wife psychologically tormented everyone around her. Richard always pretended he had absolutely no idea how cruel his family was being to me. When Susan would drop a massive box of receipts on my table and demand I work through the weekend, Richard would simply shrug his shoulders, look at the floor, and walk out the back door to polish his golf clubs. He thought his deliberate ignorance absolved him of any guilt. He thought keeping his head down meant his hands were perfectly clean. But as the family bookkeeper, I knew the truth about Richard. I knew his passive demeanor was a carefully constructed camouflage designed to hide his own spectacular betrayals. Richard absolutely deserved his own red envelope. Into each of these 4 folders, I placed specific, heavily annotated financial records. I did not just include the basic proof of Connor funneling $40,000 to his young Pilates instructor in Austin. Exposing a simple marital affair was amateur hour. It would cause a brief argument, but they would eventually unite and blame the infidelity entirely on my supposed inadequacies as a wife. I needed to inflict permanent structural damage. I needed to destroy the very foundation of their false alliances. To achieve this absolute destruction, I included the exact financial betrayals they had committed directly against each other over the last 5 years. I went through the encrypted hard drive and selected the specific crimes I had been forced to quietly fix, cover up, or ignore during my long tenure as their unpaid accountant. I printed the official bank routing histories, showing money moving from one family member's account into another without permission. I printed the forged signature logs, demonstrating how they fraudulently authorized loans in each other's names. I printed the hidden equity transfers that proved they were actively stealing generational wealth from their own blood relatives. I am a highly visual professional, so I took the time to color code their interconnected lies. I used a bright yellow highlighter to mark every time Susan stole from her daughter. I used a blue highlighter to track every time Connor lied to his mother. I used a green highlighter to map out the massive hidden debts Richard was concealing from his wife. I cross-referenced the bank statements with the corresponding deceptive emails they had sent each other, proving they were all actively lying to one another while pretending to be a unified, wealthy family. I compiled the 4 thick dossiers and slid them into their respective red envelopes. The sheer weight of the paper felt significant in my hands. It was the accumulated weight of 7 years of uncompensated labor and silent observation. I placed the 4 sealed envelopes neatly into the bottom of the heavy-duty cardboard shipping box. Finally, I opened a blank word processing document on my computer. I did not write a long emotional letter. I did not list my grievances or demand an apology. I typed a single, concise note centered perfectly on the crisp white page. The note read, "You asked me to balance the family books one last time, so here is the final audit. Do not ever contact me again." I printed the single page and placed it flat on top of the 4 red envelopes, ensuring it would be the very first thing they saw when they sliced the cardboard box open. I folded the heavy corrugated flaps closed and sealed the edges with 3 layers of reinforced packing tape. I drove directly to the local Federal Express shipping center. The clerk behind the counter weighed the heavy box and asked how quickly I needed it to arrive at its destination. I handed in my credit card and paid a premium fee for overnight priority shipping with mandatory direct signature confirmation. I needed to know the exact minute the bomb detonated inside their Texas estate. The clerk handed me a printed receipt with a long tracking number. I walked back to my car sitting in the damp Seattle parking lot and typed the tracking digits into the application on my mobile phone. The screen updated immediately, showing the package had been officially scanned into the logistics network. I spent the next 24 hours watching that little digital icon travel across the country. I watched it depart the rainy Pacific Northwest, fly over the Rocky Mountains, and land on the hot concrete tarmac in Dallas. I tracked that heavy cardboard box all the way down Interstate 35, knowing it was carrying a payload of absolute truth, straight into the heart of their manufactured delusion. I knew their Sunday routine with absolute certainty. For 7 years, I was forced to participate in that exact weekly ritual, and I understood the rigid mechanics of their schedule better than they understood it themselves. Every single Sunday, at exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Susan mandated a formal family dinner at her sprawling Dallas estate. It was never a warm gathering of loved ones sharing a comfortable meal. It was a highly orchestrated, performative event designed to reinforce their artificial hierarchy and celebrate their supposed wealth. They would sit around a massive, polished mahogany dining table, drink incredibly expensive imported wine, and complain bitterly about the people who worked for them. I used to sit at the far end of that heavy table, quietly cutting my food and listening to their endless grievances. Richard would complain about his underperforming golf caddy at the exclusive country club. Chloe would complain about her underpaid retail staff at her failing boutique, claiming nobody wanted to work anymore. Connor would mock the junior sales representatives at his technology firm, calling them lazy and unmotivated. They bonded entirely over their shared disdain for the working class, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire luxurious lifestyle was currently being subsidized by my unpaid forensic labor. I used to calculate the massive tax penalties they were accumulating in my head while they chewed their catered food. Now they were sitting at that very same mahogany table without me. They were completely broke, drowning in commercial debt, and facing federal corporate audits, but their rigid dedication to their social performance remained entirely intact. They still gathered at 1 o'clock. They still drank the wine. They still pretended they were untouchable. I had planned the shipping logistics with the same rigorous precision I applied to a corporate financial audit. I selected priority overnight weekend delivery, specifically to ensure the heavy cardboard box arrived during this exact Sunday ritual. I wanted them all in the exact same room at the exact same time. I wanted absolute maximum collateral damage. I sat at the granite kitchen island in my Seattle condominium, holding my cellular phone. The screen displayed the Federal Express logistics tracking application. Modern shipping technology is a beautiful and devastating tool. I did not have to guess where the explosive package was. I could watch its precise geographical coordinates update in real time across the country. At 12:45, the digital map showed the delivery truck entering their exclusive gated community in the Dallas suburbs. At exactly 1 o'clock, the truck turned onto their specific tree-lined street. I could clearly picture the heavy, suffocating Texas heat radiating off the pristine concrete driveway. I could imagine the quiet mechanical hum of their central air conditioning struggling to cool the massive estate while they sat inside complaining about their ruined lives. At exactly 1:14 in the afternoon, the tracking application on my phone refreshed with a sharp, audible chime. A bright green delivery confirmation banner popped up on my screen. The automated text read, "Delivered at front door and signed for by S. Montgomery." Susan had personally signed for the package. The trap was now physically inside the house.
I closed my eyes and vividly imagined the sequence of events unfolding 1,800 miles away. The heavy brass doorbell would ring, interrupting Chloe complaining about her lack of affordable childcare. Susan would stand up, smooth her designer linen trousers, and walk to the heavy oak front door. She would sign the electronic tablet handed to her by the delivery driver with a smug, satisfied smile on her face. Susan would look at the return address label printed on the top of the cardboard box. She would see my name and my new Seattle location. In her deeply narcissistic mind, she would instantly assume she had won the psychological war. She would carry the heavy package back into the formal dining room and place it directly onto the polished mahogany table for the entire family to see. She would dramatically announce that the runaway wife had finally surrendered. They would all assume I had sent back the encrypted corporate hard drives, the metal keys to the retail boutique, or perhaps a thick stack of finalized accounting ledgers, fixing their federal tax nightmare. Susan likely expected to find a groveling, handwritten letter of profound apology, tucked neatly alongside a large cashier check to fund their immediate lifestyle needs. She would want an audience for her victory. She would want them all to watch her open the box. I walked away from my computer monitors and moved into my kitchen. I filled my electric kettle with filtered water and selected my favorite dark roast coffee beans. I ground the beans slowly, listening to the steady mechanical hum of the machine. I poured the boiling water over the grounds and watched the dark liquid drip into my ceramic mug. I carried the hot coffee out onto my covered balcony. The Seattle weather was perfectly gray. A steady, rhythmic rain was falling over the city skyline, washing the glass and steel buildings. It was a cool, peaceful contrast to the explosive nuclear detonation I had just orchestrated down south. I sat down in my patio chair, took a slow, deliberate sip of the bitter black coffee, and started a mental countdown. I knew exactly how long it would take for them to locate a kitchen knife, slice through the 3 layers of reinforced packing tape, and open the heavy corrugated flaps. I knew how long it would take for Susan to read the single typed note sitting on top, stating I would never balance their books again. I knew it would take approximately 3 minutes for the initial shock to wear off. Then, it would take another minute for each of them to pull their specifically labeled red manila envelopes from the bottom of the box. The anticipation was not agonizing. It was deeply satisfying. For 7 years, I swallowed my pride and fixed their catastrophic mistakes. Now they were holding their own mistakes in their hands, and there was absolutely no one left to fix them. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 22 minutes after the delivery confirmation banner appeared on my screen, my cellular phone began to vibrate violently against the glass patio table. It buzzed with a chaotic, relentless urgency. It was not another demanding, authoritative voicemail from Susan. It was a frantic, completely incoherent text message from my former sister-in-law, Chloe. The message contained no proper grammar and no capitalization. It was a desperate string of panicked words demanding to know how I obtained those specific banking documents and begging me to answer the phone before she called the local police department. The text message was followed by 3 missed calls in rapid succession. Then came a message from Connor demanding I pick up the phone immediately and explain what I had done to his legal trust fund. The notification counter on my screen began to climb at an astonishing rate. I did not respond to a single message. I did not answer a single phone call. I simply muted the device and took another calm sip of my coffee. The metal jaws of the trap had definitively snapped shut. The unified, manufactured front of the Montgomery family was officially dead. The package had been opened, and the red envelopes were now in their hands. They realized the quiet forensic accountant they treated like an unpaid servant had mapped every single one of their hidden betrayals. What happened next inside that formal dining room was a chain reaction of total devastation, starting with the profound and ruinous secrets hidden inside the envelope labeled Susan. Let us talk about exactly what was waiting inside the heavy red envelope bearing the name Susan. To truly comprehend the absolute magnitude of the psychological and financial destruction that specific document caused, you must first understand the deeply toxic marital dynamic between Susan and her husband Richard. For their entire 30-year marriage, Susan played the role of the undisputed dictator of their household. She genuinely believed her husband was a deeply conservative, painfully boring man who possessed absolutely no capacity for deception or independent thought. Richard was a retired corporate executive who made a very comfortable salary during his working years, but Susan never missed an opportunity to publicly emasculate him. She would sit at that polished mahogany dining table and ruthlessly mock his earning potential, complaining loudly to her children that his annual corporate bonuses were never quite large enough to fully fund her lavish country club lifestyle, her expensive leased vehicles, or her frequent cosmetic procedures. Richard absorbed this relentless verbal abuse with a blank, passive expression. He would simply nod, stare at his expensive leather loafers, and retreat to the local golf course to escape her wrath. Susan demanded total control over his executive pension and his retirement accounts because she firmly believed she was the financial genius of the family. She required him to deposit every single paycheck into a joint banking account where she could monitor his spending down to the last penny. When Richard received his massive end-of-year corporate bonuses, he told his wife he was strictly investing that capital into a conservative, low-yield index fund for their future security. He even provided her with sterile, boring, quarterly printed statements to prove his financial prudence. Susan, who fancied herself a brilliant commercial real estate mogul, took one highly dismissive glance at the modest single-digit returns, scoffed at his pathetic lack of investment ambition, and never looked at the paperwork again. That was her catastrophic, fatal mistake. She trusted a printed spreadsheet without ever verifying the underlying routing numbers. Inside her bright red manila envelope, I did not place a generic emotional letter accusing her husband of cheating. I am a forensic accountant. I deal in absolute mathematical certainties. I placed 50 pages of irrefutable, certified legal documentation directly into her hands. The very first page Susan pulled from her folder was a notarized county property deed for a massive 2-bedroom luxury condominium located in the most expensive and exclusive high-rise building in downtown Dallas. The deed was not registered under the name of a conservative retirement index fund. It was registered to a private blind trust. The second page in the stack was the official state incorporation document for that exact blind trust, identifying Richard as the sole primary grantor and executor. The third page was a pristine copy of the municipal property tax filings, identifying the primary resident living inside that multi-million-dollar condominium. It was a woman Susan had never heard of before. It was a woman Richard had been secretly housing, clothing, and entertaining for 6 consecutive years. I do not just expose the existence of a secret. I expose the exact mechanical infrastructure of the betrayal. I included 30 pages of detailed bank routing histories mapping out exactly how Richard managed to pull off this spectacular deception right under the nose of his incredibly controlling wife. I used a bright neon yellow highlighter to trace the flow of capital from its origin point to its final destination. Richard had not been putting a single dollar of his annual corporate bonuses into any index fund. He had completely fabricated those boring quarterly statements on his own personal computer. Instead, he was systematically funneling all of his bonus money, his quarterly stock dividends, and a significant hidden portion of his executive pension directly into the private trust account. Over the course of 6 years, the quiet husband, Susan, relentlessly bullied and treated like an incompetent subordinate, had quietly siphoned nearly $500,000 of their shared liquid net worth. For a narcissist like Susan, discovering infidelity is certainly a bitter pill to swallow. But discovering profound financial ruin is a terminal psychological diagnosis. Susan built her entire personal identity around being the wealthiest, most financially savvy woman in her elite Dallas social circle. She demanded absolute submission from her children and her husband because she firmly believed she held all the capital and controlled the purse strings. Sitting at that dining table, staring down at the neon yellow highlighted wire transfers, Susan realized the horrifying, unvarnished truth. She was not a wealthy real estate tycoon. She was completely broke. Her supposedly boring husband had drained their retirement safety net to finance a lavish parallel life with a long-term mistress in a downtown penthouse.
The devastation outlined in that red envelope went far beyond the missing $500,000. I made sure to include the secondary loan documents. Because the state of Texas operates under strict community property laws, debts incurred during the course of a marriage are generally considered joint liabilities, regardless of whose name is on the paper. Richard had taken out a massive, aggressive secondary mortgage on that luxury Dallas condominium to maintain his extravagant double life and purchase expensive gifts for his mistress. Susan was now staring at binding legal documents proving she was legally tied to a crippling mountain of hidden real estate debt. The commercial strip mall she neglected, the residential rental properties she failed to maintain, and the massive county tax liens I had previously protected her from were now colliding violently with her husband's catastrophic hidden liabilities. I exposed the absolute terrifying reality that Susan Montgomery possessed a massive negative net worth. Her country club membership, her leased luxury cars, and her entire social standing were built on a foundation of completely vaporized money. I can only imagine the profound, suffocating silence that fell over that dining room when Susan read the bottom line of those banking statements. The smug satisfaction she undoubtedly felt when she initially signed for the package would have evaporated instantly, replacing itself with a cold, paralyzing dread. Her manicured hands would have started to violently tremble as the complex mathematics finally registered in her brain. The man she treated like a pathetic, obedient dog had effectively robbed her blind and left her holding the bag for an impending and unavoidable public bankruptcy. The initial scream that tore from her throat must have been absolutely deafening. It must have shaken the expensive crystal chandelier hanging directly above their heads and echoed through the hollow, empty halls of that massive suburban estate. She would have turned her blinding rage directly onto Richard, demanding explanations, throwing accusations, and realizing her entire life was a humiliating fabrication. But the absolute brilliance of this carefully engineered package was that Susan was not the only person sitting at that table receiving a life-altering financial revelation. While Susan was hyperventilating over her husband's secret downtown penthouse and screaming at Richard across the polished mahogany wood, her beloved golden child Chloe was tearing into her own specific red envelope. Chloe assumed her folder contained the magical solutions to her impending federal corporate audit. She fully expected to find balanced ledgers, filed tax extensions, and a brilliant strategy to save her failing retail boutique from the government. Instead, what Chloe found inside her envelope would instantly shift the target of her intense rage away from her cheating brother and place it directly onto the mother sitting right next to her. While Susan was completely detonating over the discovery of her husband's hidden downtown condominium, the rest of the formal dining room descended into a state of absolute chaotic distraction. Richard was desperately trying to defend himself over the deafening sound of his wife's screaming voice. But Chloe did not intervene to help her mother. She completely ignored the explosive marital collapse happening mere inches away from her. Chloe was far too consumed by her own mounting terror regarding the impending federal corporate audit. Her hands trembled slightly as she grabbed her specific red envelope from the center of the polished mahogany table and ripped the sealed flap open. Chloe had lived her entire 30 years on this earth as the undisputed golden child of the Montgomery family. She possessed a deeply ingrained sense of entitlement that completely blinded her to her own professional incompetence. For years, she firmly convinced herself that her trendy downtown lifestyle boutique was constantly failing solely because of external macroeconomic factors.
She blamed the shifting retail economy. She blamed local construction blocking her storefront. She blamed younger generations for not spending enough money on her overpriced imported candles and woven baskets. Chloe remained completely oblivious to the actual parasitic entity that was actively draining her corporate accounts dry. She assumed the bright red folder I sent her contained the magical administrative solutions to her federal tax nightmare. She expected to find fully balanced ledgers, filed extension forms, and a brilliant legal strategy designed to save her failing store. Instead, Chloe pulled out a thick stack of unredacted merchant processing statements and a highly detailed forensic financial map of her own ultimate destruction. To understand the sheer brutality of the betrayal hidden inside that folder, you must understand how a retail business actually processes money. Every single time a customer walked into the boutique and swiped a credit card, that digital payment did not instantly go into Chloe's pocket. The funds were routed through a merchant clearinghouse before being deposited into her primary corporate checking account. During my tenure as her unpaid bookkeeper, I repeatedly warned Chloe that her cash flow did not match her inventory sales. I repeatedly asked for direct access to her primary banking portal to find the discrepancy, but Susan always aggressively intervened, claiming she was handling the banking relationship directly with the branch manager to secure better interest rates. Susan used her authority as the family matriarch to lock me out of the highest level of their corporate banking. When I finally executed my invisible exit strategy and downloaded the master files, I bypassed their pathetic security measures and accessed that restricted banking portal. What I found was a level of maternal theft so incredibly dark, it bordered on sociopathic. The very first document Chloe stared at was a commercial banking mandate form dated 3 years prior. It was the official legal paperwork required to add an authorized signer to a corporate checking account. Chloe's signature was scrawled across the bottom line, granting full, unrestricted administrative access to her mother. But Chloe had never seen that document before in her entire life. Susan had deliberately forged her daughter's signature, submitting the fraudulent paperwork to a friendly, local bank manager she frequently golfed with at the country club. By making herself a primary authorized signer, Susan essentially handed herself the master keys to the boutique vault. The next 10 pages in the red folder were the actual, unredacted bank transfer logs I had meticulously color-coded with a bright orange highlighter. These logs proved exactly what Susan was doing with that unrestricted access. Susan had not set up a safety net or a rainy day savings fund for her daughter. Instead, she had secretly configured the banking portal to execute an automated daily sweep. At the end of every single business day, the automated system would calculate the total gross revenue the boutique generated and instantly skim exactly 15% right off the top. 15% might sound like a relatively modest number to someone outside the financial industry, but in the retail sector, it is an absolute death sentence. A boutique operates on incredibly thin margins. You have to pay for wholesale inventory, commercial rent, hourly, payroll, marketing, and state taxes, all from that daily revenue. Taking 15% of the gross income before any operational expenses are paid means the business will mathematically suffocate. Susan was systematically bleeding the boutique dry, ensuring her daughter would never possess enough capital to break even, let alone turn a profit. Chloe flipped frantically to the next section of the dossier, demanding to know exactly where her stolen livelihood was going. I provided the exact destination routing numbers. The stolen funds were not being invested in high-yield accounts or secured bonds. Susan was treating her daughter's struggling business as a personal slush fund to maintain her own fabricated, wealthy aesthetic. The orange highlighted transfers showed thousands of dollars moving directly from the boutique account to a luxury automotive finance company every single month. Susan was using Chloe's stolen retail profits to pay the exorbitant lease on her pristine white Mercedes sports utility vehicle. Other transfers were routed directly to the exclusive Dallas Country Club. Whenever Richard fell behind on his mandatory dining minimums or his expensive monthly membership dues, Susan simply swept the required funds out of Chloe's corporate account to cover the deficit and save them from social embarrassment. The wealthy real estate mogul facade Susan projected to her elite social circle was entirely financed by the slow, agonizing financial murder of her own child. The psychological horror of this revelation was infinitely worse than the stolen money. As Chloe sat at that dining table looking at the undeniable proof of her mother's ongoing embezzlement, a sickening realization washed over her. She began to recall the countless Friday afternoons she spent locked in the back office of her boutique, sobbing hysterically because she did not have enough capital to make payroll or pay the commercial rent. During those moments of profound despair, Susan would routinely arrive at the store carrying a bottle of expensive wine. Susan would wrap her arms around her weeping daughter, curse the current retail economy, and tell Chloe to stay strong and weather the storm. Susan played the role of the deeply sympathetic, supportive mother, comforting her child over a failing business while actively stealing the very funds causing the failure. She would drink wine with her grieving daughter and then walk out to the parking lot and drive away in a luxury vehicle paid for by the exact money Chloe was crying over. It was a breathtaking display of pure, unadulterated hypocrisy. Deniability is always the very first line of defense for a cornered narcissist. I knew that if I simply provided the bank statements, Susan would instantly claim it was a massive banking error. She would blame a rogue bank employee or claim their accounts had been compromised by sophisticated international hackers. She would look her daughter directly in the eyes and lie with absolute conviction. Therefore, I removed any possibility of deniability by including the underlying digital footprint. The final pages in Chloe's folder contained the raw administrative metadata and the Internet Protocol address logs tied to every single one of those automated transfers. In the modern banking era, every digital action records the specific location and the unique media access control address of the device executing the command. I printed the technical documentation proving that the 15% daily sweep was configured and maintained by a device logged onto the private wireless router located inside the Dallas estate. More specifically, the unique device identifier perfectly matched the expensive silver laptop Susan carried in her designer tote bag. There were no international hackers. There was no banking error. The call was coming from inside the house. Chloe slowly looked up from the stack of papers resting in her lap. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, sickly white. A few feet away, her mother was still standing over the table, screaming viciously at Richard about his downtown penthouse and his secret mistress. Susan was demanding absolute loyalty and financial transparency from her husband, while simultaneously standing exposed as a corporate embezzler who deliberately bankrupted her own flesh and blood. Chloe realized in that exact moment that her mother was the direct cause of her impending Internal Revenue Service audit. Susan, skimming the gross revenue, created the massive, unexplainable deficits that triggered the federal investigation. The ultimate devastating betrayal had not come from a stranger, a malicious competitor, or a terrible economy. The monster who destroyed her life was currently standing across the polished mahogany table, sipping Pinot Noir and pretending to be the victim. While the two women in the family were completely engulfed in the realization of their mutual destruction, the third red envelope remained sealed on the table. My former husband Connor sat quietly in his chair, watching his parents' marriage implode and watching his sister turn into a ghost. Connor, arrogant and deeply naive, firmly believed he was relatively safe. He assumed his envelope merely contained the old credit card statements detailing his Austin mistress. He thought the worst of his secrets were already out in the open. He reached across the heavy wooden table, picked up the folder bearing his name, and sliced the seal open, completely unaware that his mother and sister had already thrown him under a massive legal bus long before I ever sent the package. My arrogant, cheating ex-husband Connor was the very last person sitting at that polished mahogany dining table to open his specific red envelope. While his mother was screaming at his father over a secret luxury penthouse, and his sister was completely paralyzed by the horrifying realization of maternal corporate embezzlement, Connor sat back in his expensive dining chair with a look of detached amusement. He genuinely thought he was the smartest person in the room. He assumed he was completely immune to the explosive financial devastation currently leveling his family. To understand his staggering level of misplaced hubris, you have to understand the specific type of man Connor Montgomery was. He was a deeply mediocre, mid-level technology sales representative who relied entirely on his prestigious family name and a superficial layer of manufactured charm to navigate his existence. He had spent his entire life failing upward. When he missed his quarterly sales quotas, I simply paid our shared mortgage. When he accumulated massive private credit card debt, I balanced the household budget to absorb the financial blow. When his young Pilates instructor in Austin finally drained his stolen funds and abandoned him, he simply packed his garbage bags and moved directly back into his comfortable childhood bedroom at his mother's massive suburban estate. Connor always had a safety net. He firmly believed he was untouchable because he was the only male heir to the Montgomery family fortune. Connor looked down at the bright red folder resting on the table in front of him. He assumed his envelope merely contained the old credit card statements and the archived emails detailing his long-distance affair. He thought his biggest and most destructive secret was already out in the open. He had already lost his luxury apartment. He had already lost his beautiful young mistress. He had already lost the highly competent forensic accountant wife who subsidized his entire adult life. In his deeply arrogant mind, he calculated that there was absolutely nothing left for me to expose. He thought the worst was far behind him. He reached across the heavy wooden table, picked up the thick manila folder bearing his name, and sliced the sealed flap open with his finger. He pulled the heavy stack of documents out and laid them flat against the wood. Connor fully expected to see credit card logos and highlighted hotel receipts. Instead, he found himself staring down at a massive, highly complex legal contract printed on premium watermarked paper. The document sitting directly in front of him was an officially certified copy of the newly amended and restated Montgomery Family Trust. For decades, the Montgomery Family Trust was the ultimate source of Connor's immense arrogance. This specific legal entity held the actual property deeds to the lucrative commercial strip malls and the valuable residential rental properties Susan constantly bragged about at the Dallas Country Club. The original trust was drafted when Connor and Chloe were children, explicitly designating both siblings as equal 50% beneficiaries of the entire generational estate. Connor used this guaranteed future wealth to justify his terrible spending habits and his chronic lack of professional ambition. He never worried about saving for retirement or building his own independent capital because he knew he would eventually inherit a massive commercial real estate empire. It was his ultimate golden parachute. I had been the primary custodian of their financial records for 7 years, so I possessed a pristine digital copy of the original trust agreement. But I also possessed the administrative access required to see when legal structures were quietly altered behind closed doors. Connor flipped past the standard boilerplate legal introductions and went straight to the designated beneficiary schedule, located near the back of the dense contract. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His 50% equity stake was completely gone. His name had been entirely scrubbed from the distribution schedule. I provided the detailed timeline of the legal execution clearly outlined in the supporting documents. Exactly 6 months before I packed my rented cargo van and executed my invisible exit strategy, Susan and Chloe had quietly scheduled a private meeting with a highly aggressive estate attorney located in downtown Dallas. They did not invite Connor to this meeting. They did not inform him that the foundation of his financial future was being radically restructured. Susan and Chloe were fully aware of the young mistress living in Austin. They were fully aware of the massive secret credit card debts Connor was accumulating to fund his lavish double life. They were even fully aware that Connor was actively stealing $40,000 from Chloe's failing retail boutique. Instead of confronting him about his horrific behavior or demanding he seek professional counseling, they made a cold, incredibly calculated financial decision. They decided Connor was a massive legal and financial liability to the overall family empire. If Connor was ever sued by a creditor or dragged into a messy public divorce proceeding, his 50% equity in the family trust could be targeted by aggressive litigation attorneys. To protect the commercial real estate portfolio from his reckless incompetence, Susan and Chloe legally amputated him from the family tree. They drafted a completely new framework for the estate. They legally stripped Connor of his 50% equity in the commercial properties, transferring every single asset into a newly formed, impenetrable blind trust. I highlighted the final pages of the contract, identifying the sole primary trustee of this new entity. The trustee was Chloe. Chloe was granted total, absolute, and unchallengeable discretion over the disbursement of all future assets. Connor was legally entitled to absolutely nothing. The profound psychological irony of this revelation was absolutely staggering. For years, Connor had actively allied with his mother and his sister against me. They sat together drinking expensive wine and laughing at my relentless work ethic. They plotted together to hide his expensive mistress and his stolen funds from my view. They used my unpaid labor to keep their businesses afloat so Connor could continue his cheating lifestyle. Connor genuinely believed he was part of an exclusive, unified family coalition, plotting against the naive outsider wife. He had no idea that while they were smiling at him across the dinner table, they were actively stabbing him in the back with a legal scalpel. They let him steal $40,000 in insignificant retail profits from the boutique because they were far too busy stealing millions of dollars in generational wealth from his future. They treated him exactly the way they treated me. He was just another convenient pawn to be managed, manipulated, and ultimately discarded when he no longer served their financial interests. Connor sat frozen in his expensive dining chair, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality of his existence. The mother and sister he had fiercely protected and prioritized over his own marriage had ruthlessly thrown him under a massive legal bus long before I ever mailed the explosive package. He looked down at his own hands and then looked across the table at his family. He was 34 years old. He had no highly skilled wife to pay his mortgage or balance his checkbook. He had no prestigious technology job because his firm had recently terminated his employment for chronically missing his sales quotas. He was living in a tiny childhood bedroom surrounded by garbage bags filled with his designer clothing. He was drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of compound interest credit card debt. And now, the ultimate safety net he had relied upon his entire life was completely vaporized. He discovered he was legally disinherited, entirely broke, and permanently tied to a family of corporate embezzlers. The quiet, smug amusement Connor displayed just moments prior vanished completely. It was instantly replaced by a blinding, unhinged rage. He realized that every single person sitting at that polished mahogany table was actively destroying each other for personal gain. The explosive package had systematically dismantled every single lie holding their fake, wealthy aesthetic together. Susan was legally tied to a secret penthouse. Chloe was bankrupted by her own mother. Connor was disinherited by the sister he stole from. The formal Sunday dinner rapidly deteriorated into a hostile, screaming war zone. The people who had spent 7 consecutive years treating me like subhuman, uncompensated labor were now turning their vicious, unbridled cruelty directly onto one another. The screaming escalated into shattered glass and thrown chairs. The total collapse of the Montgomery family empire was finally happening in real time, and I was about to capture the entire glorious destruction on audio because someone in that dining room was about to make a critical technological mistake. The aftermath of the package delivery was not merely a heated argument or a tense family disagreement over Sunday dinner. It was a total, scorched earth, nuclear detonation that instantly vaporized the artificial reality they had spent decades carefully constructing. I know exactly how violent the explosion was because I did not have to rely on my imagination to picture the scene. I was granted a front row seat to the absolute carnage. While I sat on my quiet, rain-slicked balcony in Seattle, My cellular phone vibrated against the patio table for a second time. It was not another frantic text message from Chloe or an aggressive missed call from Connor. The glowing screen displayed an incoming voice call from my former father-in-law, Richard. Richard was an older man who was notoriously clumsy with modern technology. He frequently forgot to lock his smartphone screen before shoving the device hastily into the breast pocket of his expensive golf jackets. In his desperate, blind panic, as his entire life collapsed around him, he had clearly fumbled for his device, intending to call his discreet litigation attorney, or perhaps dial the downtown penthouse to warn his long-term mistress. Instead, his trembling fingers accidentally pressed my contact name in his recent call log, initiating a live audio connection. I answered the call immediately, muted my own microphone, and held the speaker close to my ear. For 4 incredibly glorious minutes, I listened to a live, unfiltered broadcast of the Montgomery family empire tearing itself apart from the inside out. The audio feed was slightly muffled by the fabric of his jacket pocket, but the sheer volume of their screaming made every single word violently clear. The very first sound that registered through the digital connection was the sharp, explosive crash of heavy crystal shattering against a hard surface. Susan had physically snapped. Discovering that her supposedly passive, obedient husband had siphoned $500,000 to fund a secret parallel life completely broke her psychological restraint. She picked up her full glass of expensive Pinot Noir and hurled it directly at his head. I could hear the heavy crystal goblet smash against the customized dining room wallpaper, raining dark red wine and jagged shards of glass across the expensive hardwood floor. Susan was shrieking with a feral, unhinged intensity that I had never heard her use before. She was demanding an immediate divorce right there on the spot. She bellowed that she would hire the most vicious asset recovery lawyers in the state of Texas to freeze his pension, garnish his future earnings, and seize the downtown luxury condominium. She was screaming about public humiliation and social ruin, terrified that her elite country club friends would discover she was legally tethered to his massive, hidden real estate debts. Richard was stammering pathetic, incomprehensible excuses, desperately trying to lower her voice so the wealthy neighbors would not hear the commotion through the large estate windows. But Susan was not the only woman in that dining room fighting for her financial survival. Chloe, whose entire identity was wrapped up in being a successful boutique owner, had completely turned on the mother she once worshipped. The audio captured Chloe actively advancing on Susan, her voice cracking with a mixture of profound grief and absolute venomous rage. Chloe realized her own flesh and blood was the actual parasite draining her corporate accounts. The daughter was shrieking at the top of her lungs, accusing her mother of corporate embezzlement. Chloe screamed that she was going to call the local Dallas Police Department and press felony theft charges. She threatened to hand the printed, unredacted merchant processing statements and the Internet Protocol address logs directly to the federal tax investigators to prove Susan was the one responsible for the missing retail revenue. The unbreakable maternal bond they constantly flaunted to the world had evaporated in less than 60 seconds. Chloe was willing to send her own mother to federal prison just to save herself from the impending corporate audit. Then a deep, guttural roar echoed through the phone speaker, completely drowning out the 2 screaming women. It was Connor. My arrogant, cheating ex-husband had finally digested the catastrophic reality of the amended family trust document sitting in his lap. The golden boy who had coasted through his entire adult life, relying on his guaranteed generational inheritance, suddenly realized he was entirely broke and permanently disinherited. He realized the mother and sister he had allied with against me had ruthlessly severed him from the commercial real estate portfolio behind his back. Connor did not just scream. He reacted with intense physical violence. I listened as he grabbed one of the heavy antique mahogany dining chairs and hoisted it into the air. With a deafening crack, he smashed the expensive wooden furniture directly against the formal dining room wall, fracturing the chair into dozens of splintered pieces. He roared at Susan and Chloe, calling them treacherous thieves and demanding they immediately restore his 50% equity in the commercial properties. He cursed them for letting him ruin his marriage and his career while they secretly plotted to steal his financial future. The people who had spent 7 years treating me like subhuman, uncompensated labor were now tearing each other apart like rabid dogs fighting over a scrap of meat. For my entire marriage, I had served as their universal scapegoat. Whenever Susan faced a municipal code violation, she blamed my administrative tracking. Whenever Chloe lacked inventory capital, she blamed my bookkeeping. Whenever Connor fell behind on his personal debts, he blamed my lack of domestic support. I was the convenient buffer that absorbed all of their toxicity, keeping their delicate ecosystem perfectly balanced. Without me there to absorb the impact, they had absolutely no one left to blame but themselves. They were forced to look in the mirror and face the terrifying monsters they truly were. The false unity they paraded around the Dallas suburbs was exposed as a fragile, brittle alliance built entirely on mutual deception and financial theft. I sat on my balcony feeling the cool, damp Seattle breeze against my skin. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for the chaos unfolding 1,800 miles away. I felt a profound, deep-seated peace. I opened the administrative settings on my cellular phone and calmly pressed the digital record button. I captured the entire 4-minute chaotic broadcast, saving the high-definition audio file securely to my encrypted cloud storage network. I wanted to preserve the exact sound of their arrogance collapsing, just in case any of them ever attempted to rewrite the history of that Sunday afternoon. When the screaming reached a fever pitch and the sound of a second glass shattering echoed through the speaker, I simply pressed the red icon on my screen and disconnected the call. The silence that returned to my Seattle condominium was beautiful. But the absolute genius of the package I mailed was not merely the interpersonal family drama it created. Ruining their Sunday dinner and fracturing their relationships was certainly deeply satisfying, but emotional damage is temporary. I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in temporary emotional wounds. I deal in permanent, inescapable legal consequences. While they were busy smashing dining room chairs, throwing wine glasses, and screaming about stolen inheritances, they had completely missed the final item waiting inside the heavy corrugated shipping box. Buried at the very bottom, beneath the 4 red envelopes, was a single piece of paper that would transform their bitter family dispute into a full-scale federal criminal inquiry. The beauty of the package I mailed to Texas was not merely the explosive interpersonal drama it generated inside that dining room. Screaming matches eventually end, and broken antique chairs can always be replaced. As a professional forensic auditor, I do not engineer temporary emotional discomfort or simple domestic revenge. I engineer inescapable, permanent legal reality. Once the initial shockwave of the red envelope subsided and the violent shouting momentarily paused for breath, one of them inevitably looked back inside the heavy corrugated shipping box resting on the polished mahogany table. Lying flat against the bottom cardboard flap, completely separate from the color-coded dossiers of personal betrayal, rested a single piece of standard white printer paper. It was a fully completed and officially notarized Internal Revenue Service form designated 3949A. For anyone living their life outside the professional financial sector, this specific alphanumeric title might not instantly induce terror. But in my highly specialized industry, an information referral is the ultimate weapon of corporate destruction. It is the exact official legal document utilized to report suspected tax evasion, hidden undocumented income, and systemic business embezzlement directly to the federal government. I did not simply print a blank form off the internet to use as an empty intimidation tactic. That is an incredibly amateur strategy, and I do not leave loose ends. Stapled to the top left corner of the document was the official certified digital confirmation receipt generated by the United States Treasury Department. The receipt clearly displayed a processed electronic timestamp from exactly 3 months prior. I had quietly submitted the comprehensive forensic dossier outlining their widespread financial corruption long before Susan ever picked up her cellular phone to leave those 32 demanding voicemails.
The realization must have hit the dining room like a suffocating physical weight, instantly draining whatever remaining adrenaline-fueled rage they possessed. Chloe suddenly understood exactly why she was currently facing a highly aggressive corporate audit from the federal authorities. It was not a random administrative inquiry generated by a computer algorithm or a simple stroke of bad luck regarding the retail economy. The federal investigators were actively examining her boutique because I had handed them a perfectly drawn roadmap detailing the stolen inventory funds, the forged banking signatures, and the hidden daily revenue sweeps. Connor stared at the receipt and felt the cold grip of authentic legal jeopardy tighten around his throat. His arrogant assumption that stealing $40,000 from his sister was just an internal family squabble evaporated in an instant. By transferring those stolen funds across different banking institutions to pay for his luxury apartment in Austin, he had committed textbook wire fraud. That crime was now a documented federal matter actively sitting on the desk of an assigned government investigator. Susan, the matriarch who fancied herself an untouchable real estate tycoon, was forced to confront the terminal diagnosis of her fabricated empire. The government now possessed the exact routing numbers linking her to corporate embezzlement and tying her husband to a secret, unrecorded trust account used to hide significant pension income. She could not manipulate a federal tax auditor the way she manipulated the waitstaff at her exclusive country club. Her carefully curated social prestige meant absolutely nothing to the Treasury Department. This single sheet of paper instantly transformed their bitter domestic dispute into a high-stakes criminal conspiracy. They all simultaneously realized that not only did they possess intimate, ruinous knowledge of each other's financial crimes, but the federal government now possessed that exact same knowledge. More importantly, they realized I was entirely out of their reach. During my final 2 months in Dallas, I had meticulously executed my invisible exit strategy. I systematically removed my Social Security number from every single one of their toxic corporate entities and formally resigned as their primary registered agent with the state of Texas. Because I severed all legal ties before filing the official information referral, I was completely immune from the impending fallout. I was not a complicit co-conspirator facing a grand jury indictment. I was the fully documented whistleblower. They could no longer use me as a convenient legal shield to absorb the devastating penalties. I had successfully locked the entire Montgomery family inside a classic, inescapable legal Mexican standoff. If Chloe followed through on her screaming threat to call the local police and report her mother for corporate embezzlement, Susan would immediately retaliate by handing Connor over to the authorities for committing wire fraud. If Connor attempted to defend his stolen funds to stay out of federal prison, he would inevitably expose Richard and his hidden downtown penthouse trust, which was purchased using unreported diverted income. Their numerous crimes were hopelessly interconnected, overlapping in a chaotic, inescapable web of mutual destruction. If one of them went down, they were all going down together. The federal justice system operates on a very simple and incredibly ruthless premise when dismantling a network of financial fraud. The investigators do not usually offer leniency to the entire group. The very first individual to secure a highly aggressive defense attorney, cut a formal plea deal, and formally testify against their co-conspirators is usually the only person who avoids serving time in a federal penitentiary. The government rewards the fastest traitor. The Montgomery family understood this brutal reality the second they read the date on the confirmation receipt. The violent screaming that had echoed through the estate just moments prior abruptly stopped. It was instantly replaced by the terrifying, suffocating silence of raw survival instinct. For 7 years, they had weaponized the concept of family loyalty to keep me in line. They constantly reminded me that family protects family whenever they needed me to fix their horrific mistakes for free. But looking at the federal tracking number, that profound, unbreakable loyalty instantly dissolved into pure, toxic paranoia.
They were no longer a unified mother, a father, a son, and a daughter standing against the world. They were four-cornered, desperate suspects, rapidly calculating how to save themselves by sacrificing their own blood.
Susan looked at Chloe, knowing her daughter could send her to jail for stealing the boutique revenue. Chloe looked at Connor, knowing her brother had drained her accounts to fund his mistress. Connor looked at his parents, knowing they had secretly rewritten the family trust to disinherit him. Nobody in that room could trust the person standing next to them. The illusion of their prestigious Dallas dynasty was completely dead, and the frantic, desperate scramble for individual survival was about to begin. The subsequent 48 hours would permanently erase the Montgomery name from the elite social registry and reduce their sprawling empire to ashes. Within 48 hours of that heavy corrugated shipping box arriving on their front porch, the pristine Dallas estate went completely dark. For a family that historically documented every single waking moment of their luxurious existence on internet applications, the sudden digital silence was absolutely deafening. There were no photographs of catered Sunday brunches. There were no inspirational quotes about female entrepreneurship. There were no staged images of expensive imported vehicles parked in their circular driveway. The meticulously curated illusion they broadcasted to the world was instantly suspended. But while their social media profiles remained entirely frozen, the county courthouse databases became a chaotic war zone of frantic legal activity. Sitting in my Seattle condominium, I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and logged into the Texas public judicial portals. As a forensic professional, I know exactly how to navigate regional court dockets to track newly filed litigation. The implosion I witnessed through those digital records was swift, merciless, and breathtakingly absolute. Susan was the very first person to strike. The matriarch who had spent decades deriving her entire self-worth from her perceived superiority could not tolerate the profound humiliation of her husband's secret downtown penthouse. Susan hired a notoriously predatory family law attorney and filed a vicious, highly publicized divorce petition against Richard. In the state of Texas, marital dissolution records are generally accessible to the public unless specifically sealed by a judge. Susan did not want the records sealed. She wanted vengeance. She filed an aggressive emergency injunction attempting to immediately freeze the hidden blind trust, the remaining corporate pension, and the luxury condominium housing his mistress. She formally accused Richard of severe financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, demanding the court award her a disproportionate share of their remaining assets to compensate for his deception. However, launching a high-profile hostile divorce requires an exorbitant amount of upfront capital. Predatory attorneys demand staggering retainers, often exceeding $50,000, just to initiate the preliminary paperwork. Because Susan had operated for years under the delusion of wealth without understanding her actual severe liquidity crisis, she was forced to scramble for cash. The commercial real estate properties she owned were already drowning in municipal code violations and local tax liens, rendering them completely useless for securing a fast equity loan. She was legally tethered to a sinking ship of her own design. Before Susan could even secure a hearing date for her emergency injunction, she was violently blindsided by a secondary legal attack coming from a completely different direction. Her beloved golden child, Chloe, filed a devastating civil lawsuit directly against her. Chloe, the daughter who could barely operate a basic spreadsheet, had suddenly discovered the survival instinct required to hire a bulldog commercial litigation attorney. The lawsuit, filed in the county civil court, was a masterpiece of corporate warfare. Chloe formally sued her own mother for systemic corporate embezzlement, breach of contract, and severe financial malfeasance. The petition explicitly detailed the fraudulent banking mandates, the forged authorized signatures, and the unauthorized daily revenue sweeps that siphoned 15% of the boutique income. Chloe attached the technical internet protocol logs I had provided as primary evidentiary exhibits. The mother and daughter who used to sit in the back office of the boutique, drinking wine and complaining about the retail economy, were now suing each other in open court. The civil lawsuit became an instant scandal within their affluent commercial district. Chloe's vendors, suppliers, and neighboring storefront owners could read the public filings, detailing how the business was hollowed out from the inside. Whatever fragile reputation the retail boutique possessed was permanently eradicated. The commercial landlord quickly filed eviction notices and padlocked the glass doors. While the two women engaged in a brutal public bloodbath over the remaining scraps of their shattered businesses, Connor faced a much darker and infinitely more terrifying reality. Civil lawsuits resolve with monetary judgments, but federal criminal investigations resolve with federal penitentiaries. Connor understood that transferring $40,000 of stolen corporate funds across different banking institutions to pay for his Austin apartment constituted undeniable wire fraud. The federal justice system boasts a staggering conviction rate, and Connor possessed absolutely no loyalty to anyone but himself. Terrified by the prospect of wearing a prison uniform, the cowardly prince of the Montgomery Dynasty bypassed private defense attorneys and walked directly into the local federal prosecutor's office. He requested a formal proffer session, commonly known as a Queen for a Day agreement. In exchange for transactional immunity regarding his own stolen funds, Connor officially turned state's witness against his own sister. He sat in a sterile government interrogation room and systematically outlined every single illegal accounting maneuver Chloe utilized to evade paying her required federal and state taxes. He provided the investigators with intimate knowledge of her hidden inventory write-offs and fraudulent business expenses. To save his own skin, he willingly handed the federal authorities the exact ammunition they needed to secure a felony tax evasion indictment against the sibling he had grown up with. The financial toll of fighting simultaneous divorces, civil embezzlement suits, and federal criminal inquiries drained their resources at an astonishing velocity. With multiple high-priced lawyers demanding immediate payment and their primary streams of income completely frozen, the family was forced into a desperate corner. They had to liquidate their only remaining asset of significant value. They put the sprawling Dallas estate on the real estate market. Because they needed the cash instantaneously to prevent their lawyers from withdrawing representation, they could not wait for a favorable buyer. They listed the pristine suburban compound in a highly publicized fire sale, selling the property at a catastrophic loss. The profound humiliation of seeing moving trucks parked in their circular driveway, packing their expensive furniture into cardboard boxes, while the affluent neighbors watched from behind drawn curtains, was the ultimate destruction of their social facade. Susan, the woman who once looked down on everyone from her mahogany dining table, was forced to sign a lease for a cheap, generic apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. She lived entirely alone, alienated from the husband who betrayed her, the daughter who sued her, and the son who abandoned them all to save himself. The final devastating blow arrived through a standard piece of certified mail. Elite country clubs demand their members maintain an unblemished standard of moral character and financial solvency. The board of directors, having witnessed the spectacular public unraveling of the Montgomery Dynasty and noting their severely delinquent membership dues, drafted a formal letter of expulsion. Their prestigious memberships were permanently revoked. The family name was officially erased from the social registry. They did not merely burn their bridges. They strapped explosives to the supporting columns and blew up the entire landscape, leaving nothing but scorched earth in their wake. They were left with absolutely nothing but the terrifying realization that they engineered their own demise by mistreating the one person who silently held their universe together. I watched the final court dockets update from the comfort of my Seattle home, feeling a deep, profound sense of closure. However, there was one final, jaw-dropping detail regarding my exit strategy that the Montgomery family remained entirely oblivious to. It was the ultimate financial payoff hidden deep inside my uncontested divorce settlement, and they would not discover it until the dust finally settled. I am sitting at the sleek granite kitchen island of my Seattle condominium right now, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The heavy gray rain is falling steadily over the Pacific Northwest, creating a quiet, rhythmic tapping sound against the glass.
The air inside my home is peaceful and entirely my own. Resting flat on the counter directly in front of me is a thick stack of certified legal documents bound by a dark blue paper cover. It is the final, signed and recorded settlement statement from my divorce. The legal dissolution of my marriage to Connor Montgomery is officially complete. The judge has stamped the final decree closing that chapter of my life forever. While the Montgomery family is currently drowning in a chaotic nightmare of federal criminal probes, hostile civil litigation, and public social ruin, I am sitting here enjoying a hot cup of dark roast coffee. But the profound satisfaction I feel this morning does not merely stem from watching my abusers destroy each other. The true beauty of my exit strategy, the final, jaw-dropping detail that the entire Texas dynasty did not realize until it was entirely too late, is printed right here in black and white ink on page 14 of this settlement statement. To fully grasp the magnitude of my final victory, you have to understand the specific mechanics of marital dissolution in the state of Texas. Texas operates under incredibly strict community property laws. In a standard divorce proceeding, the courts presume that all assets acquired and all debts incurred during the course of the marriage are owned equally by both spouses. They divide everything right down the middle. Under normal circumstances, my lucrative private consulting business, my massive personal savings account, and the substantial liquid equity we had built inside our suburban Dallas home would have been split evenly with the man who betrayed me. Furthermore, the staggering credit card liabilities Connor secretly accumulated to finance his young mistress would have been considered joint marital debt, meaning I would have been legally obligated to pay off half of his cheating expenses. That is exactly what Connor and his predatory mother Susan assumed would happen when they finally realized I had filed for divorce. They assumed they could bleed my accounts dry during the asset division and use my hard-earned money to hire high-priced defense attorneys for their impending criminal trials. They completely forgot about the dense legal contract Connor blindly signed on that Sunday afternoon while drinking a cold beer and watching a professional football game. When I drafted that postnuptial agreement, I did not just include basic, standard clauses to protect my future income. I am a licensed forensic bookkeeper. I spend my entire life analyzing contracts, identifying loopholes, and structuring complex corporate financial settlements. I applied my elite professional expertise directly to my own marriage. I engineered an incredibly sophisticated, airtight document designed to legally extract every single ounce of value from my treacherous husband right under his arrogant nose. The first devastating trap hidden deep inside that contract was the explicit reassignment of marital liabilities. I included a highly specific indemnification clause regarding unauthorized debts incurred outside the knowledge of the primary marital estate. By scribbling his signature at the bottom of that page, Connor legally acknowledged and formally admitted that the $40,000 he stole from his sister's failing retail boutique was his sole individual responsibility. He also legally accepted total singular ownership of the massive credit card balances he utilized to rent that luxury high-rise apartment in Austin. The document expressly forbade him from attempting to discharge a single penny of those illicit liabilities onto me. He permanently anchored the crushing weight of his own financial crimes directly to his own neck. But isolating his toxic debt was only the defensive portion of my strategy. The truly brilliant offensive maneuver involved the suburban Dallas home we shared. During our 7-year marriage, I was the primary breadwinner. My corporate salary paid the vast majority of our monthly mortgage, while Connor blew his technology sales commissions on expensive golf clubs and tailored suits. Over the years, we had accumulated a massive amount of liquid equity inside that property. Buried in the 7th section of the post-nuptial agreement was an irrevocable property transfer clause. The contract stipulated that in the event of a marital separation, Connor agreed to immediately execute a quitclaim deed. This specific legal instrument voluntarily surrendered his 50% ownership stake in the primary residence. However, the property was not transferred into my personal name. That would have triggered unnecessary local tax assessments and drawn unwanted attention from the county clerk's office. Instead, the document legally reassigned his entire share of the real estate equity directly into a private, anonymous, limited liability company that I had quietly registered in the state of Delaware months prior. Connor thought he was signing a routine quarterly federal tax extension because he was too lazy to mute his television screen and read the bold printed headers. In reality, he was legally transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars of premium residential real estate equity directly into a corporate holding account that I controlled with absolute, unchallengeable authority. I did not execute this massive transfer out of blind spite or irrational vengeance. As a financial professional, I deal in exact measurements and fair market valuations. I sat down at my dual-monitor workstation one evening and meticulously calculated the exact billable hours I had sacrificed over my 7-year marriage. I calculated the hundreds of weekends I spent untangling Susan's horrific commercial property taxes. I calculated the countless late nights I spent rebuilding Chloe's shattered retail ledgers. I factored in the extensive event planning, the corporate compliance filings, and the emergency forensic audits I performed to keep their fraudulent empire out of federal court. I applied my standard corporate hourly billing rate to every single unpaid favor they had demanded from me, under the manipulative guise of family duty. The final mathematical sum of my uncompensated labor was staggering. It just so happened that the final invoice for my 7 years of stolen time perfectly matched the exact dollar amount of the residential equity Connor signed over to my Delaware holding company. I did not just escape a highly toxic, narcissistic family. I did not just run away to Seattle to hide from their abuse. I comprehensively audited them. I exposed their dark, interconnected network of financial crimes to the federal government. And most importantly, I legally extracted my 7 years of unpaid wages directly from their pockets, using their own authenticated signatures. When Connor finally received his copy of the finalized divorce decree, the brutal reality of his situation must have crushed him like a physical blow. He sat in his tiny childhood bedroom, staring at the binding court order, realizing the profound magnitude of his own stupidity. His mother was facing bankruptcy and a bitter public divorce. His sister was actively testifying against him in a federal criminal inquiry. His family trust was completely rewritten to disinherit him permanently. And the wife he casually betrayed and took for granted had legally outmaneuvered him on every conceivable battlefield. He had absolutely no house, no savings, no trust fund, and no future. He had voluntarily paid me a massive fortune to walk away and orchestrate his ultimate destruction. I close the blue cover of the settlement statement and take a final, long sip of my dark roast coffee. The rain continues to wash over the vibrant green hills of the Pacific Northwest outside my window. My bank accounts are fully secured. My professional reputation is pristine. My mind is incredibly quiet. If there is one absolute universal lesson to take away from the ashes of the Montgomery family empire, it is a lesson about the dangerous consequences of severe underestimation. You should never treat the quiet woman who sits in the background and meticulously balances your corporate books like she is stupid. You should never assume her silent obedience is a sign of weakness or a lack of intelligence. She sees every single transaction. She understands the exact architecture of your fragile existence. She knows exactly what you cost, and when the time finally comes, she knows exactly how to collect. As I sit here in my quiet Seattle home looking out at the steady rain, I realize that my journey over the last 2 years was never truly about simple revenge. It was about absolute systemic self-preservation and reclaiming my stolen dignity. I did not just miraculously escape a psychological nightmare. I deliberately dismantled the very architecture of the financial abuse that kept me trapped in the state of Texas. The Montgomery family is currently navigating the catastrophic wreckage of their own making, and I am living a beautiful life of complete financial and emotional freedom.
Looking back at the 7 long years I spent functioning as the unpaid servant to a family of raging narcissists, I realize there is profound value in sharing the mechanics of my survival. If you are currently sitting at a polished mahogany dining table, feeling invisible, unappreciated, and completely exploited, I want you to remember these 5 absolute truths. First, you must understand the true, undeniable value of your own labor. Never allow anyone to manipulate you into providing your highly specialized professional skills for free under the toxic guise of family duty. Your time and your expertise have a hard mathematical currency. Do not let arrogant people spend your currency to fund their own delusions. Second, you must realize that absolute silence is the ultimate tactical weapon. When you discover a profound betrayal, your natural human instinct will scream at you to violently confront your abusers. Do not scream. Do not throw plates. Anger gives your enemies a clear timeline to hide their assets. Silence gives you the absolute power to engineer an invisible and flawless exit strategy right under their arrogant noses. Third, you must understand that meticulous documentation is your greatest armor. Narcissists will constantly attempt to gaslight you and rewrite history to make themselves the tragic victims. You cannot argue with their delusion, but you can completely destroy it with hard data. Keep your receipts, back up your digital files, and always know exactly where the money is flowing. Fourth, you must aggressively protect your own legal infrastructure before you ever announce your departure. Secure your personal bank accounts, separate your corporate liabilities, and sever your legal ties to toxic individuals while they are completely distracted by their own hubris. You have to build an impenetrable firewall before you finally strike the match. Fifth, and finally, you must never, ever underestimate the quiet observer sitting in the corner of the room. The people who demand the most attention and scream the loudest are usually the most fragile. The person quietly taking notes, balancing the corporate ledgers, and watching the room is the one who holds the master keys to the entire kingdom. Thank you so much for listening to my journey today. If my escape strategy resonated with you, or if you have ever had to quietly dismantle a toxic family dynamic in your own life, please hit that subscribe button to Maya Tells Stories. Drop a comment below and share your own experiences of breaking free from exploitation. Remember, your peace is your ultimate wealth. Protect it at all costs.